So it's a couple minutes after. This is Brian Vicente, the law firm Vicente Cedarburg. I'm going to go ahead and kind of dive in. I want to make sure we make the most of this power-packed hour. This will be recorded if folks want to send it to their friends, and we'll be sending that around later. The title here is New Cannabis Opportunities Upper Midwest. As I was saying just a second ago, I think some of the most exciting cannabis policy activity in the world is actually going on right now in the Midwest, in the upper Midwest, and sometimes it gets overlooked by those of us that get coast central and are looking at California or New York. And I'm not saying there's not cool things happening there, but cutting edge stuff going on in the Midwest, and we have the best experts in the country on this panel, and we're going to dive into it very quickly. Vicente Cedarburg is the law firm. We've been around for about 12 years. I've been doing this work for almost 20 years. And we have attorneys coast to coast and work on cannabis issues all day long. I rarely get surprised, having done cannabis policy for 2 decades, but there were 2 events that happened in 2022 that kind of knocked me out of my chair. One was, for those of you that have been following Washington, D.C., they've been trying to legalize weed there forever and try to implement it. And the mayor just kind of out of the blue issued an executive order. It said, guess what, Congress, if you're not going to let us implement legalization, we're going to allow patients to self-certify at dispensaries. So you can just show up, you're 21 years old, and sort of fill out a piece of paper at a dispensary in DC, and you now have access to cannabis or medical cannabis. That was mind-blowing. The other activity, or the other policy change in 2022 that blew my mind, was in Minnesota. And again, we have the foremost expert, Jason Terasek, to talk about that today. But in short, the legislature, whether on purpose or not, allowed for hemp-derived THC, so not our normal cannabis, but hemp-derived THC, to be sold via gummies, sodas, and things of that nature from many, many different types of facilities across the state of Minnesota. And obviously, those are 2 different kind of ways to approach skinning the cannabis policy cat. But for someone that's like me, has been doing this for a long time, I've worked with a lot of medical marijuana patients over the years, and knowing that they now have access in Minnesota via this law is truly remarkable. Is there more to be done? Is there incredible things happening at the Capitol of Minnesota this year? Certainly. We're also going to talk about some other issues that are going on in the Midwest. I'm from Ohio, so this is all kind of near and dear to my heart. We'll be talking about Illinois, Ohio, we'll be talking about Michigan, we'll be talking about the Dakota. So really a hyper focus on the upper Midwest, and we're going to plow through a lot of these exciting activities. So let's maybe, let me just say quickly who our speakers are. You can see it on paper here. Travis, we'll be talking about a bunch of states. He also has an incredible beard, which has been on showcase here. And the Cedarburg partner who leads our Ann Arbor office, which we actually recently doubled in size. So we're very committed to Michigan. We'll be hearing from Scott O'Malley. Scott is a friend of the firm and owner of and CEO of Clarity, which is a THC beverage company that currently is doing wonderful work in Minnesota and some other places. He'll be speaking. And then Jason Terasek, who I spoke about. Jason, of course, with the covers both hemp and cannabis law in Minnesota, as well as other states, and has been very active with the Hemp Association in that state, as well as the Marijuana Policy Project, a wonderful, wonderful nonprofit that does great work statewide. So those are our speakers. I'm going to talk about the agenda, then I'm turning over to the experts. So Gia, if we can move to the next page. So we're going to hit Minnesota hard. We're then going to talk about some recent changes, including a new head of the regulatory agency in Michigan. We're going to hit Illinois, Michigan, I said Ohio, and then we're going to kind of kick it over to North Dakota, South Dakota, Wisconsin. Throughout this, we're going to hear as well Scott, as to, Jason, Travis, and I are lawyers, so we have our own take and wrinkle on things. Scott is a business person, right? Is operating in this space, and I think will provide some really unique insights. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Jason. Jason, if you could talk to us about all things Minnesota and take some here or there, that'd be wonderful.
Yeah, thank you, Brian, for that nice introduction. I'm Jason Terasek with Minnesota Cannabis Law in Minneapolis. I have been practicing law for 20 years, practicing cannabis law for almost 5 years. Started out as a citizen lobbyist in 2018. One thing led to another. I became the Marijuana Policy Project Minnesota Political Director in 2019 and helped lead a adult use legalization bill to a hearing in April 2019. That went down in flames on a party line vote. All the Republicans voted against it. All the Democrats voted for it. But it sort of set the stage for a lot of what we're going to talk about today. It really started a conversation around cannabis, and Majority Leader, the House Majority Leader, Ryan Winkler, really took it upon himself from that day to try to push for cannabis legalization. And I don't want to give away everything, but we may be on the cusp of something really, really exciting here in Minnesota. Next slide, please. I don't have the ability to change these. Thank you. Okay, so yes, Brian was alluding to the very strange law that we passed in, I guess it was late June of, technically early June of this year, 2022, where Minnesota passed hemp-derived THC products, a hemp-derived THC product statute. So the odd thing about that, and I'll touch on this a little bit more, is that it's open to interstate commerce, and it truly is a quasi-adult use program right now. But the more recent exciting news here is that, to the surprise of virtually everyone, the Democrats have now seized control of both chambers of the legislature, which hasn't been true for a long time, and the Democratic governor got reelected. So the Democrats control the entire legislature and the governor's mansion, and there is a lot of talk about legalization of adult use marijuana here. Next slide, please. So this is probably going to be true for a lot of our listeners in whatever states you're in, but hemp sort of set the stage for where we are today. As you know, in 2014, the federal government passed a farm bill that allowed state pilot programs. Minnesota, the Department of Agriculture, working with the University of Minnesota, adopted a pilot program to comply with that, to start growing hemp legally for the first time in quite a long time, probably 100 plus years. Building upon that at the federal level, in 2018, the federal government passed the farm bill that, as I'm sure a lot of you know, legalized hemp and hemp extract, so long as they didn't contain more than 0.3% Delta-9 THC. And of course, it removed hemp from Schedule 1 of the Federal Controlled Substances Act. And Minnesota followed suit, basically passed a copycat statute here in 2018, and the green rush was on. CBD stores started popping up all over the place. Licensees for our hemp program skyrocketed. And, at that point, the market was largely for CBD. And I think a lot of markets go through this. There was this big rush into the space, and then maybe too many that were there. So some of the guys filtered away, and then the pandemic hit, and we're still sort of emerging from that. Next slide, please. Like a lot of other states, we had a thriving Delta-8 market, particularly, I guess, during the pandemic, 2020, 2021. I think, as a lot of you know, Delta-8 sort of falls into this loophole where the federal Farm Bill and Minnesota's hemp statute, it defines, or I should say, regulates legal hemp and defines hemp as with regard to the percentage of Delta-9 THC. So someone got creative somewhere and figured out, hey, there's this thing called Delta-8 THC, which can be, I think it's largely derived from CBD. And, people were calling it marijuana light. I know that's still prevalent in a lot of states. But we had questions here about that, about the health impacts of that, about the safety impacts of that. And our regulators and our legislature were watching that closely, I think nervously. There were a lot of questions about, yes, Delta-8 appears naturally, but in very small amounts. So is it still natural? Is it still really derived from hemp if you're putting it through this sort of pretty intense chemical process to extract enough Delta-8 to actually be useful for a consumer? So it was really in the crosshairs for our regulators and our legislators, particularly because a lot of people here thought and continue to think that it's really synthetic. It's really not naturally occurring. And so that led to a crackdown, next slide, please, by our regulators. And it was sort of a patchwork of regulators that had control over this. Our state board of agriculture runs our hemp program. So they issue licenses to hemp farmers and hemp manufacturers. We don't have any licensing at the retail level. So it was kind of at that, once the manufacturers were done, there wasn't a whole lot of regulation after that. And it got pretty confusing as to who really had authority over retail. So the Minnesota Department of Agriculture Food Safety Division started to step in, particularly in the sale of hemp-derived gummies, whether they contain CBD or Delta-8 in particular. And they would send out cease and desist letters to some CBD shops throughout the state. Local law enforcement started stepping up its enforcement. In Park Rapids in particular, they shut down a CBD store that was selling Delta-8 vape cartridges. And our board of pharmacy here that probably had the authority over those retail products, that's an agency of roughly 24 people, and they just weren't really ready for this hot potato that was dropped in their lap. So cities like Stillwater, Minnesota, started banning any new CBD stores. And of course, there was a wave of sort of warning letters from the federal FDA warning about potential dangers of Delta-8. So interestingly, next slide, please. That led to, let me look here. Sorry, I'm just timing up my slides here. To this strange law that we have. So our board of pharmacy, along with the bill author, sort of got together and we were trying to solve a few problems. Number one was the fear about these vapes, these sort of black market vapes. We all know we had a vape crisis a few years ago. People were going to the hospital. I think a lot of that could be traced to that vitamin E acetate, that additive that probably wouldn't exist if it came from a regulated legal market. But there was some fear that these new Delta-8 vapes might be getting people sick as well. And there was a bit of a compromise here. So I lobbied actively for this bill. Remember, this is at the time last session when Republicans had control of our state Senate and the DFL, as we call the Democratic Party here, had control of the House. So it was pretty aggressive. We were proposing to allow hemp edible cannabinoid products, don't call it food, right? Because then the FDA will be upset, but it's an edible cannabinoid product, up to 5 milligrams per serving in gummies and beverages, up to 50 milligrams per package. Of course, the compromise here is that it essentially does away with vapes and topicals by limiting the percentage of THC to 0.3%. So the market really for vapes and topicals, at least the legal market, has disappeared. But I don't know if you've seen the stories. July 1st, when this went legal here in Minneapolis, there were lines around the block at the CBD stores. People were eager to purchase legal THC products. These products have to be derived from hemp, quote unquote certified hemp, meaning they either did go through the Minnesota hemp process or would qualify under our rules. Of course, there's no marketing to children. It is an adult use bill. We require child-proof packaging, but we do all these things, and at the same time, we don't require a license of any sort. There's no special tax. There's almost no enforcement because, again, that board of pharmacy with roughly 24 people, they cannot enforce this thing statewide, and they don't have a budget to. So it's been a little wild. Cities, townships, municipalities throughout the state have enacted moratoriums saying, no, you cannot sell this stuff here. Of course, the cities of Minneapolis and St. Paul have not done that. And I would be shocked if they do. And online sales are continuing. So it's been a little bit of a game of whack-a-mole for the regulators and law enforcement to try to tamp down on our black market, which frankly is flourishing right now because there is no enforcement. All of my clients, of course, are complying with the law, but they're being undercut by the black market who aren't. And one of the problems is that I think consumers are walking into head shops and seeing gummies, seeing beverages, thinking, oh, well, that's legal now, not realizing that not everybody's complying with the law. And And the news earlier this week, the Minnesota Board of Pharmacy is suing, I guess it's a hemp-derived gummy manufacturer who thought it'd be a great idea to name his product Death by Gummies. 100 milligrams of THC in these things, according to the civil complaint. Some kids got a handle on this. A 23-year-old got a handle on this, and they got really sick. The 23-year-old died. They haven't said that actually is because of the gummies, but I mean, not exactly great for the hemp/hemp-derived THC market as we enter the legislative session in January. Next slide, please.
And while you're transitioning slide, I just want to say too, I think most people on the webinar get this, but you can't die from THC. It's like essentially impossible. So, I mean, this is a tragic story, right? So there had to be some other factor, which I'm assuming the Board of Pharmacy will dig in and sort of figure that out. But there could be some really negative ramifications from stories like this beyond the immediate tragedy. I mean, this could be the type of thing that, shifts policy in a pretty negative way for legitimate operators.
Yeah, really unfortunate incident, and the complaints pulled no punches. I mean, it was almost like this operator was trying to break the law. He was not cooperating with the government anyway. So not good, not a good look for us right now. But so shifting away from the hemp-derived THC market for a second, as I said, Democrats now control legislature and the governor's house. It's got to go through our legislature because unlike a lot of states like Colorado and other places, we do not have a citizen-led ballot initiative process. So it's got to go through the legislature. And in fact, the House actually passed a full adult use legalization bill about 1.5 years ago called HF 600. It's a really remarkable bill. It could be a model for the country. And now I think we're going to start there. I would expect, it's been a little talk about sort of the nervousness of our Senate, even though it is controlled by the DFL. It's only a 1-vote majority. I actually tabulated it the morning after election night just to make sure, yeah, we do actually have control. Okay, cool. But, beyond the sort of benevolent public policy motives that the Democrats may have to pass a legalization bill, we have 2 major political parties in Minnesota that are single issue marijuana legalization, which is unusual. And what has happened is they often run candidates in swing districts, and the DFL, the Democrats, have been losing races because arguably parties from those, candidates from those parties may be siphoning votes from the Democrats. So, like I said, the DFL has made this a top priority. We expect this bill to move soon, but they really have an electoral politics motivation too, to put those pop parties out of business because they, it's hard to conclusively demonstrate it, but it certainly looks like they have lost races in swing districts because those pop parties exist. So next slide, please. I will say there's going to be a question about whether the hemp-derived THC products survive even if we legalize adult use marijuana. There's going to be a lot of tension there. I know that debate is going on other places, Colorado in particular. The adult use market, a lot more regulations typically around that, a lot more capital necessary. And, the hemp-derived people can often come in sort of with lesser capital and compete. So I'm not taking a position on that. I'm just pointing out that that's going to be a fight. Next slide, please. Okay, yeah, that's me. I'll be back to talk a little bit about North Dakota, South Dakota, Wisconsin. I think I'm passing the baton to Mr. O'Malley.
Thanks, Jason. I'm Scott O'Malley, the CEO of Clarity, a Minnesota-based beverage company. Previous to this, I was in the CBD and Delta 8 business in Minnesota and quickly pivoted when this new law took place. We went as fast as we could to get to producing beverages with hemp-derived THC in them. And now I've been at that for about 3.5 months. Next slide, please. So it's been an explosion of growth since July 1st. Frankly, none of the beverage brands were ready to go on July 1st. I think the first one hit the market at the beginning of August. We were the third ones in the market, and we were there about August 20th. But there's over 30 beverage brands in the state currently. There's over 50 gummy brands. Some of those obviously were ready to go right away on July 1st. And then a plethora of other products, all kinds of different products, from chocolates and caramels to pixie sticks and all other kinds of delivery methods. And it is really the wild west because there's limited guidelines and parameters from the state. So you literally can sell this just about anywhere. And there isn't really any governance. There's a lack of control simply because the Board of Pharmacy is tasked with trying to regulate it. But they're a little understaffed, and they weren't ready for this to be put on their plate. So if we can go to the next slide, that'd be great. So the current market is, there's a lot of growth, there's a lot of activity, a lot of excitement. There's also some chaos that comes with it. You can sell it anywhere, but there's some gray areas. Liquor store in Minnesota, we call them liquor stores. If you're from a different part of the country, you may call it a package store or a party store. But in this particular photo that you see, this was taken in September. So really at the beginning of the brands, but you can see quite a few there. The way this is set up is liquor stores, there's some gray area there, whether they can sell the product or not in the liquor store. If you've got a grocery license with your liquor store, you can do it. But there is a lot of confusion. And in Minnesota, a liquor store can't sell food products, and a grocery store can't sell wine and full strength beer. So it's a little bit different than in a lot of other states. But in this particular case, the photo that you're looking at, that is a coffee shop turning its display around into the liquor store. So that when you're in the liquor store, you can see what you want to buy, but you technically have to go into the coffee shop to buy it. So it's really kind of a strange situation, but it's happening all over. Some liquor stores do have grocery, and there are some on and off premise locations, mainly outside of the metro area, where you can have both on sale and to go. But it's been confusing, and although there are a lot of liquor stores currently carrying products, there has been a little bit of enforcement, but all of it, I think, as Jason had mentioned earlier, it's all complaint driven. So if someone down the street doesn't want a competitor selling the products, they simply make a complaint, and then the enforcement will come in. There's also a question on the liability for restaurants and bars. It's not going to be covered under liquor liability, but it should be covered under general liability, but some of the carriers are excluding it. I know that there are a couple of brokers in Minnesota that are currently looking for carriers to put an endorsement or a rider together so that these bars and restaurants feel comfortable selling the products, and that they're covered in case someone overindulges and has a problem. The lack of enforcement does open up the door to illegal dosages. I think Jason gave us a little glimpse of that with his story. But there's a lot of them out there. If you can go into a lot of different shops and find dosages that are well above what the legal limits for the state of Minnesota are. But eventually that's going to get taken care of. We just don't know for how long. And then you've got some untested products that don't follow the regulations and don't follow the label requirements. And that's really about it in Minnesota. It's label requirements and dosage requirements. And for the most part, there aren't a lot of other parameters set up currently. I think most of the companies that are in the space right now would prefer to have some parameters and some rules and guidelines put in. We expect that that's coming in the new legislature, but we don't really know. And of course, we are concerned about how recreational legalization will affect our ability currently to do business to the way that we are doing it. And then we've had some issues with the testing companies not having the machine calibrated for low dose products. You took a 12 or a 16 ounce can with 5 milligrams in it, it's much less than 0.01%. And so they were having trouble having consistency in this. So we're on our fourth lab right now, and we're getting some results. We have our own HPLC testing equipment, so we can test it and know where it is. But when we send it out and it comes back differently, or we send it to 3 different labs and 3 different labs come back with different numbers, we understand. And we've had our scientists talk to their scientists. They know that they've got some calibration issues and that they need to deal with those. And I think that they're going to. There are a couple of them that put a little bit of money and capital into making those changes so the calibration can work. But that's all coming along. Remember, this came about really quickly. It was passed in June. We had products on the shelves in July. So it really did move fast. And I don't think there weren't very many people that knew this was coming. So it was a heck of an opportunity, but it came with some challenges along the way too. And we can go to the next slide, please. Yeah, so the current market, some of the positives are it's an opportunity for the public, and not everyone is comfortable going into a dispensary to buy THC products. The benefit of the law right now in Minnesota is you can buy it anywhere. So you can buy it in grocery stores, you can buy it in liquor stores, you can buy it at bars, restaurants, convenience stores, salons, massage places. So there's a lot of different avenues to get it. It makes it, from a medicinal standpoint, the access is really great for people who want to try to use it. There's another thing that comes with having a metal card in Minnesota. You can't own a gun. And so there are a lot of people, a lot of hunters in Minnesota, a lot of outdoors people who won't necessarily get a medical card because they'd have to give up that right. And so that this new law allows a lot of people to be able to have access to the product that might not have been able to do it. Open distribution allows for a lot of these different types of stores. And it's really, you know, for the most part, most of the products that came out were low dose. They were 2, 3, 5 milligrams. There's a few 10 milligram products right now. We're not really seeing some of those higher dose products currently, but I expect that they will be coming. But it's a nice opportunity for someone who's curious or wants to experiment a little bit with it, to come in and try it and see how it works for them, to give them whatever they're looking for, whether it's to just kind of chill out or you know, handle some pain or some anxiety or whatever reason they would want to participate. Next slide, please. One of the other things that has been a positive is that it provides farmers. So farmers in Minnesota grew an awful lot of CBD, CBG, and other cannabinoids, and it'll give these farmers an outlet for these products that they currently don't really have. And so hopefully that'll help them. There's people sitting on some warehouses that are full of a product that they grew last year and the year before. The other thing is that the law has allowed for some innovation in routes to markets. There's a lot of people trying to get these different products into retail outlets using non-traditional methods. Because it's not a dispensary model, you can sell it pretty much anywhere. So there's a lot of unique ways for people to be trying to get this. And they're looking at, you know, for instance, we use beer distributors to handle our products, but there are people looking at people who deliver all kinds of different products and have the distribution centers to get these different THC products into the marketplace. And I should be clear, hemp-derived THC products. There are also, I think Jason had touched on this also, there currently isn't a state sin tax, which makes the products more affordable. We certainly expect that that's coming. But as of right now, it's simply the sales tax that generates revenue for the state of Minnesota with these hemp-derived THC products. So there are some parameters. You have to have testing and a valid COA from a third party regarding dosage, and that it doesn't contain any metals or pesticides somewhere in the chain of custody of the active ingredient. And then there's some label issues, or at least some parameters about not making claims. But for the most part, that's the extent of it. So there's not a lot of extensive testing. There's not multiple tests along the way. So, you can have your plant material all the way through to your end product. Oftentimes in other states, there's multiple tests along the way. In Minnesota, it's the end use. Now we use obviously the test from the distillate that we use to make our emulsion. But for the most part, that's it.
Gotcha. And then enforcement side, what are you seeing there?
The enforcement side really is complaint driven. They just don't currently have the staffing to handle enforcement. So unless someone makes a complaint, there isn't really any enforcement. There are products that that are certainly not legal that are being sold. And there are products that haven't been tested that are being sold. But eventually the state's going to get around and we're going to figure out a way to have enforcement. I think all of us would appreciate that. It would make our jobs, particularly those of us who are trying to do it the right way, it'll make our jobs a little bit easier.
Thanks, Scott. I'll stop peppering you with questions. It's super interesting. I'll let you complete your presentation.
Thank you. So the sales and distribution, understanding this route to market has been difficult with as many products as there are out there. Trying to get the products into retail locations for some of the brands have been really difficult. If you don't have a distribution model or a sales model that's beyond self-distribution, which can be time consuming and onerous if you're selling a product and making deliveries, that can be pretty tough. And there's only so many that any one person can handle. There's over 8,000 potential retail outlets. And that's not counting some of the ones that you wouldn't typically think of, like salons or yoga shops or that sort of thing. And so there's a lot of places that are interested in carrying the products, and the distribution and the ability to get that product there has proven to be difficult for some of the brands. I've heard a lot of talk about some companies starting their own distribution companies that would be specifically for hemp-derived products. But it's a lot of capital that you would have to put in for trucks or warehouse people, and not knowing for sure what the legislature might do pertaining to legalized recreational. I think that's kind of a risk that although people are trying to figure out how to do it, I think it's going to be a little bit of time before we really figure out what's going to happen on that and which direction some of these bigger distributors of all kinds of different products will go. In most states, it's a dispensary model. So you have limited outlets. That's not the case here. And so it just becomes a little bit more strategic on how you approach taking your brand to market. The other thing is, with all of these different retail locations, the staff at these, if you go to a dispensary, generally speaking, the bud tender is pretty knowledgeable. They're knowledgeable about the products. They're knowledgeable about the reaction, what low dose or what particular doses will do to somebody. We've got a lot of education to do with the people that are selling our products or any of the other companies' products in Minnesota, of trying to get these people kind of up on what they're making recommendations to for people about how much to take and how it might affect what they're looking for. So there's a lot to be done in Minnesota. It's certainly an exciting time. It's a lot of fun. It is the wild, wild west. And if you embrace that part of it, you're having a good time. And I think we're passing this over to Travis now.
Awesome. Well, my computer played ball. There we go. I think I'm off mute now. So I'm Travis Copenaver. I am our attorney kind of managing our Michigan office for Vicente Cedarburg. I have been practicing cannabis law in Michigan since about end of 2014 into 2015. For those of you who need a quick rundown on Michigan and how we can kind of compare what Michigan has done to what some of these new states might be able to do. Michigan passed a patient caregiver non-commercial licensing kind of system law, more just a personal criminal defense based right in 2008. That market kind of came into maturity over the next 2 years, really into about 2010. In Michigan, the government balance between like local municipalities and the state is pretty strong for municipalities. And we saw a lot of municipalities in Michigan, really from about 2008 to till we got to our commercial licensing laws, have like really regionally location-based opportunities for what we used to call gray market dispensaries or business operated medical marijuana facilities with no regulatory structure in place. And that created a lot of opportunities for folks and a lot of issues, which is a whole presentation on its own. But in 2016, our, at the time, Republican-controlled legislature really getting in front of what was likely to be a promising ballot initiative put in place a medical licensing law. We followed that up with a ballot initiative for adult use recreational marijuana licensing in 2018. And since then, we've seen both of those markets kind of in parallel mature into where we are today. Our system in Michigan is really kind of a two-step approval process. If you're going to be operating commercial facilities, you usually need to get approval for your physical location from a municipality. And once you have that, you go get the stateside approval from our regulatory agency, the Cannabis Regulatory Agency, or CRA. And over really since 2016, 17 to present, we've seen our regulatory agency go through a wide variety of challenges, a wide variety of market influences to not only grow and adapt with the opportunities in Michigan, but really kind of focus in on efforts that were important to their role as regulators and adopting to not only the challenging political situations of the time, things like COVID hit Michigan hard in interesting ways as well, but also rapid market expansion in Michigan. And to this day, even in our last election, we continue to see, cannabis items hit the ballot. We've had 32 municipalities in our last election cycle consider cannabis proposals, either to expand market opportunity or to limit them. A lot of those, kind of were empty air. A lot of them made major impacts in their local markets. 13 additional municipalities voted in favor of actually expanding or creating new business licensing opportunities. We saw existing markets in some of our largest cities kind of either clarify or learn lessons and implement those lessons into the regulatory structure at the municipal level. And we continue to, every time there's a time period, we learn in our state what's working and what isn't. And we're seeing legislatures both at the state level and at local municipalities learn and adopt. Thank you. You read my mind. I was going to tell you to switch the slide. So recently, we've had some pretty major overhauls in Michigan. Over the really 2021 to present, we've kind of had a redraft of like our administrative rules, all the operating kind of requirements for our various license types that have gone into effect. And just recently, our governor appointed a new director, Brian Hanna, for the Cannabis Regulatory Agency. Brian has been what we call a field inspector and kind of in charge of enforcement-driven priorities for the Cannabis Regulatory Agency over the last 5 years. He's someone I've met several times, I have a lot of respect for, but we're seeing kind of leadership in that organization shift from turning on and learning how to adopt a completely new regulatory structure to one of a regulatory structure that, with an agency that has experience, knows what they're doing, and kind of prioritizing kind of that insight and knowledge into the challenges of the day. Brian is going to be implementing a more enforcement and compliance-driven approach where leadership before was just trying to make the structure work in the first place and learn the lessons that entailed along the way. Like I said, as a regulatory agency continues to have the experience that you can only get through actually trying to implement the program, they've learned a lot of lessons. One of the main kind of challenges for market entry in 2016, 17, 18, 19 was just bottlenecks to getting into the market. We started with a very strict, very difficult, very expensive system to enter into. It really created a situation where if you weren't either very lucky to have all the factors kind of line up or financially backed, it was very difficult to get market share early on into the system. And by the time our regulatory structure learned how to focus on the issues of the day and learn like what the challenges were, not only for making sure that their regulatory goals were met in terms of vetting applicants, running background checks, making sure that the policies and operational rules that they put in place not only made sense on paper, but actually started working, we saw our regulatory agency kind of focus and simplify structures. It created more insight and dependability and opportunity to know what types of positioning and structure applicants and business owners needed to do to kind of fit the mold our regulatory agency needed them to operate in a compliant way. And it also taught them kind of what the issues were that were keeping some of the stakeholders in this market that they wanted to support and adopt from entering into the market in the first place. We started seeing our state kind of adopt social equity driven policies and creating financial assistance for the types of applicants that have been traditionally left out of the market. I think the big lesson, kind of being out boots on the ground as I watched my state and directly participated in this pay attention in Michigan, is by the time our state learned what those priorities needed to be to help those types of stakeholders, it was already kind of too late. Most of the market had been kind of approached by those who could move the fastest and adopt the easiest to take advantage of opportunities. And, we kind of see a state looking at, well, all the licenses for retail and cultivation kind of basically got issued over the first 2-3 years of the program. And now we want to encourage situations where new types of parties come in. But, there's not a lot of left that are still excited about the market now that we've shifted to more mature kind of operational goals. So we still continue to see wonderful opportunities for folks, but as the kind of interest level moves from entrepreneurial driven excitement to business decision driven, I got to keep these businesses afloat. I need to pay for employees. I need to, adapt to the stumbles we've made along the way and deal with enforcement and compliance issues that we've done through operations. And in any new industry, as our regulatory agency learns, so do our business operators. The benefit of hindsight is obvious, right? To this day, we have the Michigan legislature continuing to consider ways to make this market not only meet their safety, enforcement, and public benefit goals, but also to create a structure and a system that works. We're seeing bills pending to make changes to our licensing background check structure that left a lot of stakeholders out. Just to kind of explain the bullet point I have on the slide, anyone with any sort of interest in a cannabis applicant in Michigan, whether on a new license application or some sort of merger or financial investment into it, would often draw your spouse into the background check process, regardless of that spouse had any financial or management connection to the business in the first place. And we had statutory required disqualifying factors. For example, if you have certain types of criminal history and you became what we call a supplemental applicant, if I happen to be married to someone with one of these disqualifying features, buying through that marriage alone, my entire ability to participate in the Michigan market was just prohibited. The state of Michigan understood that, but their priorities were so driven on making the market work, getting the vast majority of people who wanted to participate into it through the process, that, now that we have time to, as licensing interests come down and operation interests go up, they have time to see what worked, what didn't, and continue to make marginal and significant, depending on what they're working on, improvements to our overall structure. Michigan was an interesting system as it had both a statutory foundation where our legislature adopted our medical licensing rules, and then 2 years later we had a ballot-driven proposal where we turned on adult use legalization, basically kind of mirroring and making marginal improvements to the medical structure that was in place. You can go ahead and move to the next slide for me if you like. Thank you so much. One of the best things, in my opinion, that the state of Michigan's regulatory system does is it collects and aggregates a large amount of very useful information for anyone interested in reviewing it. In addition to licensing and quarterly reporting that we have built into our statutory requirements, they release and publish a wide variety of data that you can use as someone interested in this market or someone participating in this market to just kind of see how you're doing compared to other states that have similar systems and similar structures in place. A lot of this market data can help you make informed business decisions. We can move through a few of them. Yeah, you can just go ahead and linger on them for a few seconds and then move on. But you can kind of see how we can watch as our data change throughout the years. Really 2020 at the beginning of these graphs is when our adult use system was coming online. And you can kind of see how the data helps you see what's happening in Michigan on the ground as one of the stakeholders in a variety of different positions in our market, but also see, what those opportunities were and how you could have, in hindsight, made more informed decisions as that market came online. We're seeing a lot of what we call Croptober or saturation. We have a lot of easy access to the market from a manufacturing side, with a lot more competition and business just competitiveness in getting to the retail side. So as that's played out over the course of the last 3 years, we're seeing a lot of product hitting the market, and a lot of folks getting product into the market with a huge demand on the sales side from consumers. And we're watching what is probably an obvious resolution for everyone: the price per pound, starting to go down as demand continues to rise, because getting access to retail market share is still kind of slowly rolling out. There's still more people that want to buy cannabis in markets that, well, we don't have retail stores opening up yet, but our manufacturing side kind of outpaced our retail side. So if you're looking to come into the Michigan market, or kind of see how the Michigan program worked out, we have a wide variety, and I could give you 100 slides on just different data presentations, so you can kind of see all this work, and you can kind of see where along the way different market decisions, both the industry as a whole and our regulatory kind of agency made, and what that output was from a investment side, or an operation side, or a planning side. And I'm going to kind of shift from Michigan for a moment into some of our sister states. Illinois had a very similar kind of timeline with us. They are actually one of the, for Minnesota here to learn some lessons, one of the first states to have a robust state legislature driven regulatory system put in place. And one of the big kind of selling points, one of the big rallying cries in Illinois when they were trying to get these legalization efforts pushed through, was a huge emphasis on trying to get some of what we call social equity, or marginalized potential stakeholder interest into their system. And while that was a wonderful goal that we all should support, how they chose to actually roll that out had mixed success. As the Michigan regulatory agencies that govern cannabis and hemp kind of learn lessons and continue to improve, no one's perfect. The market demands and the kind of budget demands that you have to play ball with really just create outcomes that are pretty predictable when you're looking at the systems in place. In Illinois, for example, we see a pretty light level of manpower in their licensing and regulatory agencies, which has created delays. It's difficult to push applications through. Whereas in Michigan, some of our timelines might not be as fast as my clients want them to be, but they're pretty predictable. And predictability and consistency not only helps you make informed, decisions, but successful decisions when you can kind of rely on as much information as possible to make the best decision for you. You can go ahead and move forward. I'm just some points about Illinois. If you're diving deeper into that state, they're continuing to make improvements, but every state makes those improvements at different timelines to different degrees. So, in Illinois, they're currently discussing bills to make improvements to their regulatory system, whereas in Michigan, we've had kind of the opportunity for that regulatory system to kind of improve itself and kind of have more autonomy over itself. Illinois has some amazing data, but not as much as Michigan. So if you're in Minnesota, you have influence over some of the decisions you can make as that system comes together and hopefully not only gets passed, but then puts into place. I think the more data that you can collect and share not only helps you as a state kind of learn what you need to know to improve your own system, but it helps a lot of business owners and people that want to participate in this industry just kind of know when and how it's the best time for them to do so. Down in Ohio, we've had medical marijuana for a while now. There have been efforts to legalize. We have House bills that were introduced that were kind of introduced a while ago. We're starting to see some movement on. We just got, some updates from the state representatives that are kind of behind Ohio legalization efforts, giving us updates just a few days ago. The system that they're currently contemplating in that bill looks very similar to Michigan. There's, an emphasis on decriminalizing conduct that's currently considered illegal, placing excise taxes on sales, creating a system of commerce and licensing that's consistent, from medical and adult use programs. I think that's probably my last slide, but I just have a few more thoughts to share through the time here. Minnesota, to me, kind of with the benefit of hindsight, has its own unique kind of issues, but a very similar situation that Michigan had with a patient and caregiver system. We have a lot of interest, market participation in a framework that doesn't have a lot of structure right now. That's going to be some amazing financial opportunities for the folks that can thread the needle, and a significant amount of inconsistency and risk for the vast majority of people who might want to. Rules and structure are great, not only for clarification, but they just create better business opportunities. You're going to, as you grow businesses in any of these states, have disputes. Rules and structure provide dispute resolution. You're going to want to, invest in or exit from the investments you've made into these businesses. Rules and structure create mergers and acquisitions opportunities. It creates, frameworks in which you can either merge or joint with other businesses and mature with your market, do what you're good at, which is turning a new market on and then, passing it off to folks who are more operationally driven. Standardization is not only good for consumer safety when we start making sure that the products that are hitting the market are tested and tested in a consistent way so that the north half of Michigan has a different testing standard than the southern half. Patients anywhere in your state want to have consistency, but that standardization and consistency is also important when you're making business decisions and setting your business up. If you're in a cultivation business and there's testing requirements that are unknown, it's going to be very expensive for you to change and adapt to a moving target. So the more consistency you can create and the more kind of evidence and information you have about the trajectory of what your framework is going to look like is not only going to be better for the regulatory agency to actually enforce that structure, but it's going to be easier for businesses that want to enter into that market to know what they're entering into, to know what they're signing up for, so that they can take business risks and push market innovation and not take business risks that are, well, when we started, the rules told us we could do this and they changed them on us 2 months later. And now, half of our investment is meaningless. So, when you're in a new market, if the goal is stakeholder participation from disproportionately impacted businesses or consumer safety or, even just limiting kind of the influx of investment and interest in a market like this with the new opportunities it creates, the more structure that you can have in place creates predictability, and that creates an avenue for dialogue that's constructive. The more that we can move people from whether or not we can legalize marijuana to now that we've decided to do it, what's the best way to do it in our state, the more stability you're going to have across the board. And that's what our goal here is, if people are asking me what you can learn from Michigan, it's, learn from our mistakes, see what works well, see what our priorities were after we got past the initial excitement and what they started focusing on, as their priorities now that the industry is starting to enter into maturity. Illinois had a great idea to try to implement stakeholder participation early on, but did they actually do so effectively? I'd say probably not. Michigan did the same thing. We didn't really focus on that when it was time to create opportunities for them. We focused on creating opportunities after, it was really too late. So, you have an opportunity here in Minnesota and some of these other states that are going to be coming online to, figure out what your priorities are and create systems to facilitate those priorities. It's kind of a higher level question than whether or not you should do it in the first place. And that's where data, I think, is really useful. Michigan has a robust set of data. You can kind of see, well, politically, this was happening in 2019, and here's what our market looked like. And when those policies and procedures were put in place, here's how our market responded to it. And that's the type of data that I would hope legislatures in Minnesota and other markets that will be doing this over the next few years can learn from, so happy to answer more questions.
Well said. Yeah, I feel like we have 3 states left, which are frankly not as exciting as Minnesota.
Sorry.
There's something going on, and I want to make sure Jason has a few minutes to cover those. The good thing is we do have a Q&A chat. We've actually been able to address a lot of those questions live during the webinar, but Jason, you want to kind of bring us home?
Yeah, thanks, Brian. So I am based in Minneapolis. I'm Minnesota Cannabis Law, but I'm licensed and I represent clients in Wisconsin, North Dakota, and South Dakota as well. Before the election, I was predicting North Dakota and South Dakota were going to be legalizing adult use marijuana through the ballot, and neither of them passed, unfortunately. So North Dakota continues to have a medical program, but their voters have decided they're not ready for adult use marijuana there. We spoke, Brian, Vicente, and I did a seminar with Jared Moffat of the Marijuana Policy Project. MPP was running both the North Dakota legalization plan and the plan to decriminalize marijuana in South Dakota. I think in hindsight, perhaps they would have focused on just one state because they lost both, unfortunately. Next slide, please. South Dakota, you might recall, the voters did approve a medical program and an adult use program on the ballot in 2020, The medical program continues to exist and is coming on board, but you may have heard that the adult use program was challenged in the courts and ultimately struck down. So this ballot initiative wasn't quite on that level. It wasn't in a full adult use marijuana legalization bill. It was just to decriminalize. And the plan was to then attempt to legalize through the legislature. But even that was voted down. So that was a surprising result to me. It's unfortunate. I think MPP or someone else may take a run at one or both of the Dakotas again, but I think they're licking their wounds and regrouping right now. Wisconsin, geez, even a sorrier state of affairs for cannabis policy. You may know that Wisconsin's one of the most gerrymandered states in the country. They re-elected a Democratic governor to a second term through the statewide vote, right? But the legislature itself is overwhelmingly controlled by Republicans, close to 70%, I think. So just put your head around those numbers. If you're electing a Democrat statewide, your legislature is roughly 70% Republican. Kind of odd, but it's a long way of saying that the Republican Party in Wisconsin has shown very little interest in moving forward with medical marijuana, adult use marijuana. There may be some thought that, their neighbor to the south, Illinois, that the fact that they have legalized adult use marijuana may be putting some pressure on legislators in Madison, Wisconsin. Minnesota, like we've discussed, maybe legalizing adult use. Wisconsin's missing out on a lot of tax revenue by not legalizing adult use marijuana. Perhaps that message will start to hit home for the GOP, but that remains to be seen. One more last thing I'll say about Minnesota, and then Brian, I'll hand it back to you and we can wrap up. I think the point is, if we are left with a hemp-derived THC market here, I am almost certain that the legislature will be tightening that up a bit. They're going to enact some additional licensing, taxing, regulations, et cetera. So frankly, my clients want that. When I go to the Capitol and I lobby, the legislators are often surprised to say, yes, please regulate us. We do not want the bad actors in this space. We want consumers to feel safe. So I expect the legislature will tighten that up a bit. That's it. Brian, back to you.
Thanks, Jason. And it's been a really excellent presentation from all the speakers here. We do have a couple quick questions. We're going to get those in kind of a lightning round fashion. And then we're going to get out the door just to be respectful of people's time. There's one question about Ohio, Travis. I've been following this too, and we're pretty close with the trade associations, et cetera. But thoughts, I don't know, Travis, you have thoughts on a ballot initiative on 2023 in Ohio, or if we see something through the legislature. I think you spoke about how, there are bills being discussed at the legislature, but what's your read on that?
I mean, I'm personally of the opinion that until a bill's passed, it's just talking. So I think a little pressure behind it is only helpful. But you need to appreciate the realities of the political situation there. I mean, I don't know if you can speak to it more closely than that, Brian, but I think it's important to make sure that there's that ballot kind of coming behind the bill, just in case something doesn't go the way that with the bill that you want it to. So.
Gotcha. Yeah, and I do think the polling's there, right? I mean, it's tough to win these measures in non-presidential years, and we saw that pretty heavily in the Dakotas, right? But I think, if you wait 2 more years and run it in Ohio, you win. If you run it in 2023, I think it's a little risky. I think that's about the summary. We're kind of getting ushered out the door here, but I did want to say, our speakers have been wonderful. All of us are available if people have questions. We will be sending around there's people's information as well as these slides, and we're happy to chat either from a manufacturer's perspective like Scott or from the lawyer perspective like the rest of us. So thanks so much for your time. Thanks to our speakers. Appreciate y'all.
Thanks, everyone. Yeah, feel free to email us if we didn't get to you.
Thank you.